where I've been and who I am, all the ways I've grown.
This isn't self-help, it's a full-on rebirth. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, the podcast for women who are done playing small, staying silent, or living by rules they never wrote. I'm Amy Pelicot, journalist, divorce and life coach, and freedom warrior, and I'm here to help you take your power back. Because the system isn't going to save us. We need to save ourselves. So grab your coffee, your courage, and maybe a few curse words. It's time to wake up. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, everybody. Today's guest is Lindsay Lieberman, a trauma-informed attorney who represents victims of sexual misconduct, cyber sex crimes, harassment, sextortion, blackmail, image-based sexual abuse, often called revenge porn. I'm sure you've heard that term thrown around, and Title IX violations. Lindsay has spent more than a decade helping survivors. She is amazing at what she does. She helps them understand their rights, protect their privacy, and take back control after deeply violating experiences. Through her practice, she helps victims navigate some of the most overwhelming and vulnerable moments of their lives, particularly after separation and divorce, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, Lindsay. You know, her message is simple but powerful. I believe you. I know you have that right on your website, which I love, Lindsay. You are not alone and you have options. So today we're going to talk about how women can begin to feel empowered again after their privacy is violated and red flags to look out for. So let's start out with, you know, when we say this term cyber abuse, it's thrown around a lot these days. Like, could you define that for people? Like, what does that mean exactly?
Yes, it basically means that a person is using technology or the internet or cyber capacity as a weapon, using apps and platforms and access to some of these accounts in order to cause harm, in order to hurt them. And so there's a lot of different forms of cyber abuse. Sometimes it's also called tech facilitated abuse.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most common and recognized forms is one that you mentioned in the introduction, which is revenge porn or intimate image abuse, which is when a perpetrator will either threaten to share or actually does share the intimate images of their survivor, their victim, without their knowledge and consent.
Crazy story, which just occurred to me to share here. Years back, I was online dating, right? And I was chatting with someone who looked like an upstanding gentleman, whatever. So we're talking on the phone and he happened to tell me his name in the course of conversation. He said it. And I Googled him, being the investigative reporter I am. I almost fell out of my chair. He had been arrested for revenge porn, and there were all sorts of mug shots. And for the longest time, I would show my girlfriends and my support group the photo of him on like Match.com, looking like, you know, this upstanding, nice guy. And then the mug shot where he looked absolutely crazy. Like, it was like, I thought there was nothing more stark than that of how someone can represent themselves, right? And then what they're really doing. It's something I would have loved to write about for an article, but, you know, you can't get sued. I have referenced it in one, but, you know, it's just amazing that is out there so much these days, right?
Yeah, and I'm so glad for you that you did do that Google search and that you did find that information. And also, I'm so glad that he actually was held accountable for his crime, because until relatively recently, crimes like revenge porn were often not prosecuted or investigated, and also weren't even considered criminal until 2010 around, when the first state started to criminalize the act. So we've made a lot of progress in recognizing these kinds of forms of abuse, but there's still a lot of work ahead. And the fact that this person was arrested is actually like, I'm glad, you know, because so often perpetrators don't get arrested for a number of reasons, which we can talk about.
Right. So if someone doesn't know exactly what revenge porn is, how would you explain that?
So oftentimes in relationships these days, with cell phones and cameras being so readily available to us, partners are consensually capturing and also sharing with one another intimate photos, videos. Some partners will record their own intimate experiences with each other. These are all done with this contextual consent, the understanding that these images and videos are being shared for each other's enjoyment only, and that they're not going to be disseminated outside of that relationship. Unfortunately, perpetrators, abusers, will oftentimes use the intimate images as leverage to either force their partner to stay in a relationship when they don't want to, and or if the partner should leave the relationship, the abuser will often then go and share the images, the videos. They'll either publish them online, or they'll do something more specific and hurtful in some ways by sending the images specifically to somebody who's important in their partner's life. For example, I recently represented a woman who had just left an intimate relationship with this man. And when she broke up with him and refused to get back together with him, he sent extremely explicit videos of the two of them having sexual intercourse to her father. And, that kind of abuse is outrageous, unacceptable, can have lifelong lasting consequences for someone. And it's hard to get justice in these kinds of cases. And so, the system, we're still navigating all of these issues within the system.
Right. I've had some coaching clients who have had situations like this as well, and are consulting attorneys. And I know I've given some your name. We know that coercive control is like the foundation of all abuse, and cyber abuse is part of that, right? Because that story you were just talking about, she wanted to leave. And we know that's the most dangerous time for women. So they will pull any trick out of the bag, right? Threatening, I'm going to take the kids, threatening, you're going to live on the streets, you're going to eat cat food the rest of your life, or I'm going to disseminate these private images or videos I have of you. So what are some of the red flags, Lindsay, that women can look out for in relationships and marriages, right? That this is being used to control them?
Great question. And I'm glad that you mentioned marriages, because I can't tell you how many wives I represent whose own husbands are perpetrating this kind of privacy violation against them. But in terms of red flags, to answer your question, we have to have a level of independence when we enter into intimate relationships. And so often it's easy when you're getting close to somebody and becoming more intimate that you want to share information and you want to share access. So it can be common to share passwords. It can be common to share online accounts and be able to log in to your partner's accounts in order to, sometimes it's just for convenience. Like, two partners might share the same Amazon account for ordering paper towels and diapers.
Starts out innocently.
But unfortunately, a perpetrator wanting access to those kinds of devices can also be a sign of what's to come, which is potentially the cyber abuse. So if you are noticing that your partner is asking for access to all of your devices, your logins, to be able to track your location using GPS, ask questions, pause, maybe wait a few months, or even just say no, because you have to build a shield of protection around you in case. I hope it never happens, but you never know. So just to be really safe and careful ahead of time, the same way that we talk about making sure that before you enter into a relationship, you have your own bank account for that financial independence. You also want that cyber independence and control over your accounts and your life online.
And there's often a double standard, right, Lindsay? I mean, I see this with my coaching clients all the time, because most of them are divorcing a coercive controller, where they are supposed to give access to all of their private information. However, the abuser keeps everything under lock and key, right? You can't have access a lot of times to any of the financial information. There's a lot of financial abuse. They guard their phones and their devices. Sometimes they have multiple phones, right? And so there is that dichotomy there. And I want to be clear that of course, we're not blaming any women, because I think that our issue, if it's not really an issue, it's a good quality but can be used against us, is that we trust other people. We think people are honest like we are, right? I'm a good person. If I would protect someone's privacy this way, or this photo, they would too. And you can't make that assumption even in marriage, we hate to say.
Absolutely. And another critical point here is that oftentimes the perpetrator or abuser is playing the long game. So, of course, we as the women or the potential victim, it's not clear at first. It's a long drawn out game that is played where they slowly get you to start trusting them more, letting your guard down. They ask you to share one password 1 month, and then a few months later they ask another. Maybe they also share access to their financial information at the beginning of the relationship, but they slowly take it away. So it's not just like this blatant, like eye-opening experience. It's a long process, which is coercive control and manipulation. And once somebody realizes how deep they're into it, yes, it's easy to think, oh, I was so dumb, or, blame yourselves. But no, it is the fault of the abuser alone. And he has literally worked hard to get you to be in that place where you have lost your control.
Right, you're hunted like prey in a way, right? And I had an ex-partner who, I will never forget this, would say, oh, you have access to the accounts, here's the password, right? And then I'd go to try the password and it wouldn't work, and I'd say like, well, honey, it doesn't work for me. And then he'd say, oh, come here, and then he very quickly, like, so I couldn't see, like, oh, look, see, I'm in, it works fine. It's a whole gaslighting, like, mind game, right? The lengths that they will go, oh, you have access, I don't know why it's not working.
Exactly. The gaslighting is very real. We're seeing abusers using technology such as smart home devices like Alexas and smart thermostat options to literally like completely confuse and disorient their partners. So by changing the temperature, making it really hot, then making it really cold. And then of course when someone asks a question like what's going on with the temperature or why isn't this password working, just like you said, the answer is like, oh, it must be in your head. Why aren't you typing in the letters correctly? I told you the password. Or it's not hotter in here. What's going on with you? Maybe you should see a doctor. And so convincing the partner that there's something wrong with her,
Mhm.
as was depicted in the classic
Yeah.
movie
Yeah.
Gaslight, is a big component that I see with my clients.
Right. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie or play, Ingrid Bergman is saying, oh, honey, the lights are flickering. And her husband says, no, they're not. No, they're not, when they clearly are. And that's one of the most devastating parts of narcissistic abuse, right? Is that the perpetrators make us doubt ourselves and doubt our own intuition. That's one thing I work with women on, is building that back up like a muscle, right? And when you were talking a couple minutes ago about how this can happen even in marriages, all I kept thinking of was that Jazelle Pelicot case, right? And I'm listening to her book, and it's just so devastating that this man she trusted and thought had her back, was bringing other men into their home when she was drugged up to have sex with her, right? And we're not saying that you shouldn't trust any husbands out there and all of that, but you have to be alert. You have to protect yourself, not blaming her at all. Who would have ever thought that, right? But I think you've got to almost be your own investigator, right? Looking for some of these things, getting help from someone who can validate for you when the thermostat goes from 70 to 55 or 60. You're not imagining this.
Right. And I find that a big obstacle for my clients sometimes is there's a lot of shame and humiliation around it. So going and asking for that help, whether it's to a coach or a friend, to come in and evaluate and help, there's hesitation. Part of that, I think, is because we don't talk about this kind of abuse as much as we should be. So there isn't so much of an awareness. Part of it is that these crimes aren't prosecuted the way they should and need to be, again, to spread the word. And also, for a lot of my cases, and for Jazelle Pelicot's case, we're talking about like the most intimate, vulnerable parts of ourselves, our naked bodies, our sexuality. And so, the case is quite similar to a lot of cases I have where my clients have been married to their husbands for many years. They have children in common, and they, without their knowledge or consent over the course of many years, their husbands are just freely disseminating their intimate images and videos. And the words narcissistic abuse or narcissistic personality, that really rings true to me. For these men, I can only imagine that it's some sort of control or fantasy or sexual deviancy that they want to share their wives' nude bodies and sexuality with strangers, with people they know. It's just the consequences of it. The fact that these mostly men do not see the damage that this kind of humiliation and privacy invasion causes to their partners. The word is narcissistic, right? And it's this coercive, narcissistic effort to control their wives' bodies and sexuality and share it on a platter with other people.
Right. And
It's atrocious.
right. I think we know that the telltale sign of narcissism is a lack of empathy, right? So they don't even give a second thought to how this is going to affect her or anyone else, their children or anyone else. I think that, the golden rule when dealing with a narcissist is remember, they're always going to do what, satiates their ego at that moment, right? Because I have clients all the time say, I don't understand. One day he said this, the next he did this, he did that. Or things happening in our political world today that we won't get into. And people say, oh, I don't understand. It's simple. When you know the behavior, they literally are just going to do what suits them and what makes them feel important. I can imagine that these guys gives them big ego boosts. Look at my wife, look at what we did last night, or look at how I let another man have sex with her. And it makes him feel macho, which is all part of the disgusting, manosphere we're experiencing, right?
Yes, 100%. It's consistent with the manosphere and all of that you're referencing. And then it goes another level deeper and uglier when we wind up in court.
Right.
And then when, custody is at issue and my client and the divorce attorney and I representing the victim want to put this image-based abuse into evidence to reflect, the character of this man and the crimes that he committed against her. And then all of a sudden the pictures are being used against her. And then this narcissist goes into victim blaming. And unfortunately, we're still, as a society, blaming victims. And so when the defendant gets up and starts convincing the judge that his wife had poor judgment for posing in the pictures in the first place and for not taking better control over where they wound up being, the arguments sometimes succeed. And it's mind-blowing. And it's basically weaponizing his own abuse that he perpetrated against her a second time, another level against her again in the court where she's trying to get justice.
Right. And we know in Joan Mayer's seminal study, only 41% of abuse victims are believed when they report it in custody cases in family court, right? So this is just another example of that. And we know that sometimes attorneys, and some have told my clients this, we're not going to bring up the abuse thing. We're not going to bring that up because you could lose the kids because, like you said, the tables could be turned against her. How do you advise clients? I know every case is different, Lindsay, but what do you tell them they should have as a legal strategy?
It's a great question. And because every case is different, I approach each case differently. I want to clarify that I'm not a divorce attorney, but I am a victim advocate and I'm a civil attorney. So oftentimes my clients will hire me to join their team of legal advisors to help navigate all of these really complicated issues as a partner with their divorce attorney and also as someone with this very specific background of the sensitivities and nuances of domestic violence and cyber abuse. Because just like you alluded to, very well-meaning divorce attorneys who certainly know the law and are great people and great attorneys don't necessarily have the training and background on these very specific issues and can't understand the psychological and emotional components of how it causes victims to suffer and the importance of bringing it up in the case in one way or another. So,
Right.
for example, it's not always appropriate or best practice to bring it up in a divorce because if custody is involved, it can be twisted, it can be turned around, and it can be used against a client. And I had a situation like that where there was concern. And so what I did was outside of the divorce case, I worked with her to navigate, well, what would it look like to go and file a police report? And we analyzed that and we strategized whether or not that would make sense. It was a crime that her husband had committed against her. But of course, with that, there are pros and cons. Did she want her child's father arrested for violating his mother in this way? What kind of an impact would that have on the child years to come? But those answers don't come naturally. So part of the work that I do, which is probably similar to what you're doing in your coaching role, is really talking through the pros and cons of different legal action and considering different consequences and outcomes and allowing our clients to make an informed decision. Um, Instead of oftentimes what lawyers might do is just like shut it down. Like, no, we're not doing that without explanation, without really spending the time
And
to.
that is really a second layer of betrayal sometimes, right? You feel like, okay, now institutional betrayal, like here I've experienced this abuse and then I go to someone for help and they're not validating. So you're absolutely right. You have to weigh those options.
Yes, exactly. Not validating, not understanding, not all lawyers are able to explain things in like a compassionate person to person way. They're more used to speaking to judges. But another big part of a lot of my cases, and that case specifically, is civil law.
Right.
There are strong civil laws now that we can bring against perpetrators of cyber abuse, and it doesn't have to be in the divorce. So, for example, my client was going through a divorce. She decided not to report to the police. She didn't want to go that route, but we did file a civil lawsuit. We didn't do it off the bat. We spent months strategizing and collaborating and tracking the divorce to see how that was playing out and really thoughtfully and intentionally making informed decisions that were best for her specific goals and the outcome that she wanted. So we filed the lawsuit, we litigated that separately from the divorce, and she wound out with a favorable outcome that she is so grateful for.
That's
So
wonderful because so many women these days and victims feel like, where is the justice for any of us, right? We have the Epstein case still going on. Everything we're reading every day in the news makes you feel, for some women, that why should I even come forward? They're not being held accountable. So that's a huge win.
yes, and that's so important that we spread awareness of that there are options. And so often, like you're saying, survivors feel like there's no point in coming forward. No one will believe me. No attorney will take my case. I don't have evidence. And I want to just throw all of that out the window because there are attorneys like me who will work creatively within this really niche area of the law that is still developing to let you have a voice, to empower you and let you bring back some of the power that's been taken away from you. It might not be the way you initially thought it would look in a courtroom, making a victim impact statement, but maybe it's more subtle and maybe it's an empowering letter, a demand or a cease and desist. Maybe it's a lawsuit. Maybe it's a restraining order. There's so many different options that many people don't know exist. And so that's part of the work that I want to do by teaching people what options are out there and empowering people to look into it and actually, exercise their rights.
That's great. When someone is being threatened with exposure through one of these channels, what is the first thing they should do?
First thing to do is take screenshots because so often when we see something scary online, whether it's a threat or it's your own picture, the instinct is like to delete it, close your laptop and get it out of there because you're in fight or flight and you know, your cognitive functioning brain goes offline. And the best thing to do is to pause and to collect all of that evidence, because that evidence, the threat, the picture, is what you need in order to take action, in order to file the police report or hire a lawyer, take the case to court. You also never want to engage with a perpetrator, even if it is your husband or your boyfriend. Once there is a threat to disseminate your images, it's a crime. Uh, you know, to the extent that you can get help, call a friend, call a lawyer, you know, as soon as possible to get the situation under control. That often has better outcomes than continuing to engage with the perpetrator, which will ultimately wind up causing you to be more afraid and maybe do something that you don't want to do, like get back in the relationship or
Yeah.
send more explicit, intimate images, right? So you really want to like capture and preserve the evidence and then step away and get help to make the best strategic next step forward.
Well, we know that it takes on average 7 times, right, for abuse victims to leave that type of relationship. And one of the ways they get you back is threats like this, right? I'm wondering, Lindsay, would you say that police are more receptive to these complaints? I think the expression on your face says it all.
I think some are. I wish they were doing better. I wish there was more training. I wish there was more conversation in precincts. Unfortunately, I still have clients who tell me that they went to the precinct with their intimate images and the police officers told them how hot they looked in them. So I can't say, I don't tell any of my clients to go to the police without sitting down with them and talking them through what might happen there. Because unfortunately, well, yes, there are many wonderful officers and detectives. Sometimes, and unfortunately more commonly than not, survivors walk into police precincts feeling one way and they leave feeling even worse. And that should never happen. So these these situations are crimes. You should report, but I recommend and encourage you to have an advocate if you can. There are nonprofit organizations that will help, and also there are attorneys like me who can help you navigate that law enforcement criminal justice process so that you don't have to do it alone. If you do have a bad experience, you've got somebody next to you to help you.
And I bet that, this is one of the worst parts of our jobs, right? Is for me, it's exposing women to the realities of family court, right? Which is so similar and intertwined with maybe going to law enforcement and not being treated seriously. Or I just had a client yesterday tell me police were called to their house for a fight and the police left and said, oh, it's just a domestic abuse and domestic incident and left. So we hear this all the time. And I think it's so devastating for me when I'm on Zoom, I'm looking into the eyes of my client and they are just dumbfounded and shocked that this is our system, right?
100%. And I encourage all of those people to call me because I can get on the phone with the police and I can lay it out for them. Especially in situations of cyber abuse, oftentimes the police officers are maybe not trained in what the evidence needs to look like, or maybe they're not trained in what can comprise enough evidence to meet the standard. So they're overwhelmed by the cyber aspect of a case and they just say, we can't investigate it. I had a case where the perpetrator had used a Proton email address. So it was like an anonymous email address that he used to send those intimate images to my client's father. He sent them right after so anyway, the police originally said, we can't take action because we can't prove that it's him. He used this Proton email address. So technically it could be someone else. Like, come on, it's obviously the abuser. And the way I was able to convince the police to take action and make the arrest was laying out the whole situation coupled with legal arguments. They had just broken up. He was messaging her weeks before the emails got sent, begging her to come back. He had the knowledge of who her father was in order to get his email address. He was the person depicted in the pictures, so it was clearly that he had access to the pictures. He stopped sending them after my client got a restraining order and he was served. All the circumstantial evidence was so clear that it was him, but the police needed somebody to lay all of that out. And then when it was done, they made the arrest. So it's really helpful to have an advocate.
Right. And don't you think, Lindsay, that, you know, in our misogynistic world, women are often discounted as hysterical, crazy, overly emotional, and having that third party validation from someone like you, even though you are a woman, you're an attorney, you're going to present it factually, not that she has not done a good job of that, but you could do the best presentation of your life at a police department and they could be skeptical. And I've been in that situation where, I've been facing someone at a police department who had that kind of like, you know.
It's scary. It's intimidating. You don't know what to say. You don't know what not to say. You don't know what the laws are. You are in this scary, dark, frightening place talking to somebody in a uniform. Of course, victims themselves aren't able to articulate in the best possible way what needs to be said in order for legal action to be taken. That makes sense. Every police station should have an advocate hired to do that job. And it's never the victim's fault for not being able to say the things that need to be said in the right way, of course.
Well, thank you for all you do, because I think there are so many great empowering messages. And I hope all of you listening or watching know that there are steps you can take. There are people out there like Lindsay to help you. I want to move on, Lindsay, to the segment I have here on Girl Wake Up called Truth or Trap. And it's a time when I throw out a common statement that maybe people in our society have said. And I want you to react to it and tell me if it's truth or trap. If a woman willingly sent an intimate photo or video to someone she trusted, she can't really complain if that person shares it later.
Ugh, classic trap, awful. I mean, this is the crux of everything, society, unfortunately, will often think like, well, she should have thought twice before sending the naked picture if she didn't want it sent around. And of course, we know that that sounds just like the phrases that used to be thrown around in courtrooms, like, well, how short was her skirt when she got raped, right? It's blaming the victim. It's putting the burden on the victim. It's looking at the conduct or the decisions that the victim made instead of focusing on the crime itself, the conduct of the perpetrator, which is the only point that matters. The distribution of somebody else's intimate images under our laws is illegal. And so that statement, that premise, we have to get it out of our heads. We have to get it out of the manosphere. It is not legitimate. It just hurts survivors. It causes survivors to be less likely to come forward. And we really have to get that trap out of here.
Great answer. And I think that we see so much of this sympathy in our society, right? I mean, often single moms are demonized, like, oh, you're a one-parent household and your children are going to suffer. It's like no one talks about the man who left and ran off with someone else and abandoned the family. It's like, okay. All right. I want to move on to a listener letter we have. It's a woman actually in my support group who I told you were coming on the show. And she says, Lindsay and Amy, my ex keeps threatening to ruin me if I don't do what he wants in our divorce. He has private photos I sent him years ago when we were together, and he's hinted that he'll send them to my coworkers or post them online if I keep making his life difficult. I feel embarrassed, terrified, and trapped. I don't even know if this is something the law can help with because I technically sent the photos to him. What should I do first? Well, you covered this a little bit, right? What would you tell Michelle, her name is?
Well, I mean, when I hear something like this, I'm like, oh my gosh, you have so many options. Like, to me, if she has evidence that this man is threatening her to do something that he wants in their divorce, that to me is quite relevant to the divorce.
Right.
Again, I'm not a divorce attorney, but that sounds like coercion within this legal process. So I think the first thing that I would recommend she does is tell her divorce attorney and show the evidence that she has, the threats. She doesn't have to show the intimate pictures themselves, just the fact that she knows he has the pictures and he's now using them as leverage to get what he wants is a crime. And whether or not it comes out in the divorce itself, or she needs to go separately to navigate the other options that are available to her, she should absolutely take action. This is a form of domestic violence and abuse that he is perpetrating on her during their divorce. This is horrific, and she should take action right away.
Right. And absolutely. And it's likely that there are other forms of coercion, right, in this relationship. And I always say to clients, sometimes we're, throwing up a Google Doc that we're working on together on Zoom, that you have to show that pattern of abuse, that pattern of behavior, right, coercive control. Because I often tell my clients, attorneys are wonderful, but, their divorce attorney may be handling so many other cases. Let's make it easy for him or her, where you outline it in bullet points. So they have it right in their folder for your case of like, this is what happened. These are the dates. I remember an attorney saying to me years ago, the court doesn't care about stories and emotions. They care about facts and evidence, right? So to your point, the photos, the date stamping, the journal entries, all of the logging of all of this is really crucial, right, Lindsay?
Yes. And I love that idea of organizing the evidence in a way that the divorce attorney can look at quickly and digest. Because just like you said, they have so many cases and there's so much information, and they're, thinking about the law and like the legal arguments. So when an attorney gets all these emails with random pictures and messages, it's hard to like put it all together.
Yes.
So if a client has someone like you who's helping them to organize and synthesize and lay out in a very clear chronology, it makes the attorney's job so much easier and will enable the attorney to really help the client the way they need to be.
Yeah, I definitely found that. And I often joke, I use my journalistic skills, because I do that too. And used to be a full-time investigative reporter. So it's like I had to distill information, right? And sometimes a lot of these women are caught in, and I've been there, right? In that moment, in that, trauma-induced panic, and your brain really isn't working. You cannot organize and process things. You really need somebody from the outside to say like, okay, let's put this together. It is storytelling. It's not a happy story, but it's a story that needs to be told concisely. So thank you so much. Anything else, Lindsay, that I forgot that you want to add?
I don't think so.
Well, what would you say to women out there who are, feeling there's nothing I can do? I mean, sometimes when we see what's going on in the news, it's staggering.
Yes. It's so important for women to know that there is something you can do. Justice looks different to everybody. There's all these different paths that you can take to heal, to feel your power back, to move on. It doesn't necessarily mean lawsuit. It doesn't necessarily mean arrest, but there's so many ways that you can get through this with the right support and the right team, that we're out there. And the more often that people like you speak out and take action, you're only inspiring other women to do the same and follow in your footsteps. And so we collectively, can really lift each other up and empower each other. There's so many amazing women's organizations and leaders who are working on these really important issues. So, plugging in and playing your part, to the extent that it helps you to get justice and move on, I highly encourage that.
Right. We're all in this together. Tell everybody how they can find you.
Sure. My website is lindsaylieberman.com. I have an Instagram, which is Lindsay Lieberman ESQ. I'm on LinkedIn, and I look forward to chatting with your audience. I'd love to hear from them.
Great. And that's Lindsay, Lindsay, everybody. And I'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much. This was such an important and needed conversation these days. So I appreciate you being here. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening to Girl Wake Up. I'm your host, Amy Polacco. If this episode woke something up in you, don't let it fade. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it, leave a review, and keep this conversation going. Remember, no one's coming to save you, so she did.